There's something oddly satisfying about watching Karen's face glitch like a broken television. Eyes wide, mouth stuck halfway open, the exact moment a plan she spent weeks nurturing detonates spectacularly, and you realize you're the unintentional pyrotechnic. I never pictured locking my own pool would trigger a 911 call, a neighborhood circus, and a federal investigation, but then again, I'd also underestimated what a deranged HOA president could do when bored and feeling important. My name is Ethan Ward. I'm a fire marshal. Yes, the kind of person who measures their life in codes and checklists. The guy who dreams in voltage and permits, and I own the only non-duck swamp pool on our cul-de-sac. It's private, it's legal, and for the past 5 summers, it's been the island of sanity where my son Mason and his friends test the limits of their water wings. I keep it open out of a neighborly habit, no fees, a taped sign-in sheet on the back door, and a simple rule, don't be an idiot. Every neighborhood has one, the self-appointed official of other people's business. Freshly bleached smile. Chihuahua named Freedom, and a talent for walking into disputes like she invented them. One Thursday afternoon, I came home from an inspection to find Mason sitting at the kitchen island, dripping phone in hand, looking betrayed. Karen had locked the backyard gate. With my lock. From the outside. With a dollar store padlock dangling like a joke, I clipped it off, let the boys back in, and went to test the pool's automatic safety systems. The very features my department requires, the ones I helped implement as part of code outreach. Nothing. Lights dead, pump silent, motion sensors playing dead. I checked breakers, replaced fuses, ran wire tests. The backyard had gone electrically mute, like someone took a magician's scissors to the circuits. Then I found the junction box near the shared park fence, wide open wires cleanly clipped. That was not a mistake. So I did the sensible thing, caffeine patience and a polite knock. She answered in a pink velour tracksuit like it was 2007 and smiled in the way people smile when they think embarrassment is a weapon. "Concern for the kids," she said, as if vandalism and concern share a postal code. "You can't exclude people," she declared, chin high, the way someone insists on a moral high ground built on other people's property lines. 2 hours later, the cul-de-sac was lit by flashing lights as Karen stood on the lawn waving her arms like an air traffic controller who'd missed her calling. She'd called 911. "There's a child in distress. He's trapped behind an electric fence," she shouted. EMTs and officers piled out, only to find me in my department shirt. Mason under an umbrella sipping Gatorade, and Officer Lucas squinting at me like this was the punchline to a bad joke. "You made the call?" he asked. "No," I said, and pointed him to the live stream from the pool camera. Calm, obvious, a teenager with headphones, not a crime scene. They left with a warning for misuse of emergency services, but warnings are temporary. What Karen wanted wasn't a citation, it was escalation. The next morning, duct tape and an HOA letter awaited a notice of non-compliance, printed in 3 fonts with just enough formality to make people tilt their heads. My keypad lock, my private pool, even my lemon tree had become aesthetic violations. The HOA had no jurisdiction on my parcel, it predates their maps, but authority is often less about law and more about who convinces others to believe a lie. I called Sierra, my second in command, and the investigative half of our little department. She arrived with a voltage meter, a tablet, and the kind of sarcasm that doubles as a search warrant. She crouched beside the junction box like a detective finding fingerprints, and her verdict was blunt, clean slices, deliberate sabotage. Someone who knew wiring had come into my yard and tried to turn safety into danger. It was petty, yes, but malicious, classic tactic: damage, then point fingers. That was when the watching started. Dolores, she of soil stress admonitions, began tiptoeing around with a garden camera. Neighbors who used to bring over casseroles suddenly watched through curtains. They weren't defending the neighborhood, they were editing a dossier. That slow burn, passive-aggressive surveillance is corrosive. It accumulates into a story where the target is guilty by repetition. So I documented. I gathered timestamps, not because I wanted drama, but because evidence is how you keep the narrative honest. I installed a hydrodome, an auto-locking retractable pool cover I'd consulted on not as a flex, but as insurance. It looks like a tiny greenhouse, retracts in under 30 seconds, filters, UV monitors air quality, and most importantly, locks when needed. To Karen, it was a bunker. She printed flyers about radiation pulses and the dangers of invisible fences. She demanded keys. She turned neighbors against something meant to keep kids safe. Keys to my private pool. That was the moment I smiled and called Sierra to say, "Bring popcorn." Then the sabotage escalated. At 3:47 a.m., one camera feed went black for 17 minutes, surgical targeted. Next, the control panel for the dome was scorched, pry marks, and melted plastic like someone had tried to force a hardware failure into arson. Footage between 2:08 a.m. and 2:41 a.m. was obliterated, not janky but destroyed. Sierra ran the logs and found a Spica jammer signature. Illegal jammers are federal territory, and suddenly this petty grudge smelled like something much uglier. We staged a community safety day to show what the Hydrodome actually did. CPR demos, fire extinguisher practice, kids with plastic helmets, county officials, the whole normalcy parade. Mrs. Conway asked about a blinking camera on the HOA side of the fence, cheap, solar zip-tied angled at my yard. The clips were labeled with names and times. It was a surveillance log meant for harassment. That was when we caught Brent Halverson on the night feed. Brent, the HOA infrastructure chair, caught at 2:03 a.m. with a radio jammer and a toolkit at my control box. I walked into Brent's office with a folder and a calm ultimatum: 2 hours to explain before charges. Brent muttered Karen's name like a talisman. She wanted to scare you. And folded. Evidence spoke where rumor whispered. An FCC trace tied the jammer to the HOA rooftop. State investigators followed the trail. The HOA was fined. An emergency vote removed Karen from her role. Anonymous complaints were banned, and the complaint process was rewritten with witnesses and documentation required. It was satisfying in that old-fashioned way, paperwork and procedure beating performative power. But here's the quieter part, the part that sits in my chest after the sirens fade. Systems we design for protection can be twisted into weapons when fear becomes currency. Karen didn't care about the pool or the kids. She cared about control. She weaponized neighbors' anxieties in a complaint process built to protect people, not to empower petty tyranny. I could have matched sabotage with sabotage. I could have burned a house of cards down in flames of my own, but tit for tat turns a neighborhood into a battleground, and no kid deserves that. So we chose documentation over drama witnesses, over yelling and patience, over theatrical revenge. And it worked. Neighbors who'd been pulled into gossip folded their hands and asked for proof, not headlines. Dolores baked banana bread with an apologetic note. The Hydrodome opened and closed like clockwork. Kids swam, barbecues resumed, and for once the sound of a sprinkler felt like a triumph. Karen left the stage, Brent disappeared from the committee chat, and the HOA chastened, restructured how complaints work. The satisfying part wasn't merely the fines or her resignation, although those were sweet. It was watching a community reclaim its own story and seeing how fax badges and a folder printed with timestamps can quiet a whisper campaign. Justice in this case looked like democratic process, legal accountability, and people deciding they wanted evidence over gossip. So what's your playbook? Do you expose the puppeteer on the HOA stage with documents and public votes, or do you take the long road of neighborly patience, letting tantrums starve for attention until they fade? Drop your answer below. Argue your side. Tell me which feels like justice to you. If you've ever been pulled into a petty power war, tell us how you handled it. Did you win, lose, or find a middle way that kept the peace? Share your story, weigh in on right versus wrong, and if this resonated, pass it along so the next person dealing with a Karen knows they're not alone.